Okay, we are live, I think. Alhamdulillah. Okay, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Welcome to what is, inshallah, the first of many critical conversations that we're going to be hosting on this channel to, inshallah, make the members of the Muslim community more politically aware and to introduce this ability to think critically about geopolitics to them, inshallah, so we can use this skill for actions that are pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, inshallah, we're going to be discussing some very important topics today. We have here Nathir, who's going to be answering some questions, inshallah. So I think we're going to start with discussing Syria. Is that correct?
Yes, Assalamu alaikum, James. Yeah, so many would have heard of what was currently taking place in Syria right now, the situation in Sudan, back and forth with a bit of Israel. So just a lot of context is needed to understand what is actually taking place and why there's a back and forth between Ahmed al-Shara, the current leader of Syria, and the Israeli government right now.
So, if you could maybe start then with what you think is the most important piece of contextual information here that Muslims are going to need to know to really start to get a foothold on this situation, or maybe a few pieces. What would you start with?
I think the context is probably the most important thing to understand the situation. Currently, uh, we have a new Syrian government, but it's important to know what were the steps that were taken by the government to get into power and the ideology of the government that's currently in power. Many will know that Bashar al-Assad was the previous Syrian government, or he was the previous Syrian leader. Many would say a dictator, and him and his family were in power for about 60 years, right? We're looking at a very long time. We're looking at basically a dynasty, the Assad dynasty, let's say, that led a brutal regime in Syria, putting the Muslim Syrians under immense pressure and immense turmoil. The country was almost getting more and more dissatisfied with the situation. He slaughtered his own people. It wasn't uncommon to hear him just taking people and throwing them in jail. It also wasn't uncommon at all to hear of people just being kidnapped, executed, and you would never hear anything about it. And then afterwards, you would hear from someone that was around them in jail that they've been killed, and you'd find out 5 years later, 10 years later. And so obviously that built a resentment. But what typically people would say in defense of the Assad regime, and it's not necessarily, most people wouldn't defend it anyway, but you'd have a lot of people that if they were to defend it, the biggest point that they would defend is the fact that the Assad regime was famously, or they would say was famously anti-Israel, right? They would say that the Assad regime was, and it is true to say that the Assad regime did formally take a stance against Israel in a sense. Israel and Syria were hostile states to each other, and generally, Israel, or both of them, prohibit citizens from going back and forth between the countries, right? With an exception of the Druze, and that's actually going to be very relevant to our further conversation and the situation that's currently going on in Syria and in Israel. Uh, Many will know that Syria has a historically defined region, and that you could say is the wider Bilad al-Sham, is the Levant region. But then we also have, even according to established borders, the Golan Heights, well, are regarded as Syrian territory, and they've been occupied by Israel since 1967. And they were regarded by Syrian territory, or regarded as Syrian territory, sorry, by the UN itself. So Israel has been occupying this piece of land for around 60 years. It was since it was after yeah, sorry, for around 60 years, and there's been constant, let's say, tension between them. But the Druze, inhabitants of that region and wider parts of Syria as well, I mean, the Druze are kind of scattered around, have had let's say, a relationship with Israel, a bit of back and forth. And then one might say, why does Israel what does Israel care about protecting the Druze? Israel doesn't care, right? I mean, it's very obvious to say that Israel doesn't really care about protecting the Druze itself. It's basically for them to have. an excuse and a proxy to, or an excuse to go into Syria to attack Syria for no reason, and also almost a proxy. It causes it causes a lot of political instability if you have an independent militia in the country that's going on right now that isn't loyal to the state and has loyalties to a foreign nation that is, let's say, openly hostile to your country. And then, obviously, just to quickly finish up this background point, we have the Assad regime. On the surface of it, a lot of people would say, like I said, that they oppose Israel, but in reality, um, that opposition was, it seemed to be a front. Nothing had happened between the Assad regime and Israel for the past, almost like decade and a half. Everything that did take place was almost, in the Syrian part of things, it was, let's say, to save face, a bit of back and forth, but just to save face, nothing effective. And actually, if anything, Israel kept on taking Syrian territory with little Syrian response. Israel would commonly bomb parts of Syria for no reason. Obviously, but before the Assad regime fell, Damascus would get bombed every once in a while. Uh, Parts of Damascus would be attacked. Obviously, it wouldn't be let's say, a ground invasion, but it would be bombings of bases, Iranian embassies. I mean, that would be an attack on Iran, but also an attack on Syria itself. And so it seemed to be very surface level. And then what kind of put the nail in the coffin is that Assad actually, when fleeing Syria, provided Israel with a map of all of Syria's military facilities. Right? So we have like a backdoor communication. Assad is properly willing to sell out his country for, and obviously, I mean, it goes without saying, right? Everyone knows who Assad was and what he was willing to do. But then it does suggest some sort of communication between them. Assad, and also, as soon as Assad fell, and the new government take power, the government led by Jolani, who was the leader of a rebel group in Syria. As soon as this government got into power, Israel started to encroach more upon Syrian land, more so than it had done in the past 20 years, 30 years, right? Which suggests that they were far more uncomfortable with Jolani's presence in Syria, with Ahmed al-Shara's presence in Syria, than they were with the Assad regime, right? The Assad regime, they were almost like uh, they were very comfortable with Bashar in the region, and there's many reasons for this. The biggest reason is the instability that Bashar himself caused, probably, but also maybe there was an under the table kind of understanding between Bashar and the Israeli government, which is there's only animosity between us on a surface level, on a superficial level, which is to kind of save face for my people. But in reality, you stay where you are, I stay where I am. That's from Bashar's side. And the benefit on Israel's side is he is almost, let's say, uh, an independent, oh no, not semi, not independent at all. Actually, he's a wing of Iran, or Assad was a wing of Iran, but he leads to instability in a region that's largely Sunni, that has very positive relationships generally, well, not very positive, but they have positive relationships generally with each other. Generally, we see uh, Jordan and Egypt, and on a surface level, getting along. Assad was alone, right? Assad was by himself, openly, with open animosity towards also the other, let's say, Arab leaders in the region. Causes a lot of instability. Also, Syria was a proxy of Iran in that region as well, which has animosity to the rest of the Sunni states. And so it really was to Israel's benefit to keep Bashar al-Assad there, because he contributes towards the instability of the region, sectarian differences, and it's just it's a lose on. I mean, it causes instability. It weakens the region, right? So now that the region is weak, now that there's especially Syria itself is very weak. I mean, if you think about it, a civil war in Syria it serves Israel's benefits tremendously. We have now we're weakened one of our open enemies next to us. And one might say that that's actually one of the reasons why America intervened in Syria, is to on Israel's bequest, to kind of they would say to make Bashar weak, but in reality it was to keep the conflict going. Right? It weakened Syria more and more. and then it reached a stage where basically they provide no threat to Israel, right?
Right.
Is that we kind of have like a, a a handicapped, disabled person at the border who's might say face and try and say things that were anti-Israel, but in reality
It's not a
didn't
not
have
a
any effect.
threat.
Exactly, exactly.
So the picture you described then, sort of pre the new government coming in Syria, is one of a dissonance between surface and reality. That on the surface it seems like we've got some kind of opposition to Israel from this previous government in Syria, but in reality we may suggest that there was either open communication, or in the very least the state that having Assad in power in Syria created within the region was beneficial to Israel because it kept things unstable. It means it doesn't have these countries around it that are actively trying to unite or be hostile, or to create some kind of action towards it. And so the state of affairs maybe in reality was actually something that was benefiting Israel. So if we then take us to where we are now, and the relationship that we're seeing then between Syria and Israel now, what has maybe changed, or what comment can you give on that, and how we're seeing things playing out now, and how we might look at this as well?
Yeah, so a lot of the critics of Ahmed al-Sharia since he came into power, his biggest critics have been from people. I mean, his biggest legitimate critics. Obviously, you will have Assadists that are in the region, pro-Iranian militias that are against him. But outside of that, we have his biggest critics being those who say that, oh, he is actually on Israel's side. He's actually not necessarily. Some will go to the extent of calling him Israeli puppet, but saying that he doesn't care. He's like those Arab leaders that just want normalization, and Jolani is or Ahmed al is just. It doesn't give a crap about the Palestinian people. And the reality is, if we look at the situation, if we look at how Ahmed al has been behaving before he got into power and after he got into power, before there was, let's say, a far more open animosity towards Israel. Him and Israel were not, and he was a public enemy of America, or at least America put let's say, a bounty on his head. So an enemy of America is generally an enemy of Israel, especially in that region. If you're an enemy of America, it's going to be because you're an enemy of Israel. Uh, so before he got into power, we can say he was a pretty open enemy of Israel. Since he got into power, and this is what's probably caused people to be a lot more apprehensive, is that he's been a lot more, how do I say, he's been a lot more diplomatic. He's been a lot more political. Jalani, after succeeding in the revolution against the Assad regime, has been facing attacks from Syria, from Israel since he got into power, which just goes to destroy the image that uh, Israel is happy with Ahmed al-Sharia in power. They're not. I mean, if he was a puppet for them, why would they be attacking? I mean, well, you could say, oh, fine. Maybe the critics will say that he's letting them attack, so that's positive for them. But the reality of the situation with Syria is that he's been at but let's say bombs have been dropped at his border, right? There have been I mean, if we there was a report that, if I'm putting it now, Israeli airstrike next to Syrian presidential palace, right? Now, Israel is not sloppy, or it's generally not that sloppy to bomb next to a palace and not hit its target. But what it is, it's sending a symbolic gesture, which is, hey, if we want to kill you, we could. Basically, it's a threat, right? And then we also have, so Israel has been bombing and taking over parts of, or slowly encroaching on Syrian territory. It's been bombing it ever since Ahmed al-Sharia came into power. Most recently and famously, and this is, yeah, most recently and famously, is that the military headquarters in Damascus was bombed by Israel. Right, we're not talking about too long ago. And actually, I sent I want you to open this link. It's just a bit of an ironic, let's say, definitely a double standard on the from the BBC, is that Israel is the one that bombs Damascus's military headquarters for no reason. I mean, Damascus in Syria, since Ahmed al-Shaddad has come into power, has not done anything against Israel and hasn't even tried to, right? And if we look at this, US says specific steps agreed to end Syrian violence after Israeli strike hits Damascus. Yeah, the Israeli strike hits Damascus is the thing that's important, right? Israel strikes Damascus, and now they want to end Syrian violence, right? It's a clear, double standard, a clear rewording of events in history. But yeah, and then if we look, so that's the context that we're looking at now. We're looking at Ahmed al-Sharaa has been in power for about 7 months, and in that time, we have seen definitely an escalation of the conflict from the previous 20, 30 years against Assad, right? Against, let's say, definitely Bashar al-Assad. Um, and so, and that's the context we're looking at things in now, right? We're looking at basically definitely a relationship of enemies, let's say, or open animosity from the Israeli side, and Ahmed al-Sharaa is taking a step back. Now, one would say, okay, firstly, why is he taking a step back? And secondly, why is Israel attacking, right? If they weren't attacking for the past 20 years, maybe they didn't see Syria as a threat. Why are they attacking Syria now? There's a couple of reasons that people would say for this. One of the biggest ones is that Ahmed al-Sharaa is far bigger of a threat than the Assad regime. The Assad regime was let's say, a pretty selfish regime. They didn't really care too much about the Palestinians. It was about saving face. It was about, let's say, keeping the people on board to a level. And Israel could tell this, right? So Israel wasn't really scared of Bashar al-Assad. And in fact, he served their benefit in the sense that he destabilized the region even more, right? If we look at Ahmed al-Sharaa now, we have a Sunni government that is trying to destroy any sectarian differences in the country, trying to liaise with different Arab leaders to, build a sense of unity. People would be against that, validly so. But then let's look at we'll look at Ahmed al-Sharah's side afterwards. We're looking at why they're attacking Ahmed al-Sharah now. More, we already spoke about the destabilization of the region. Ahmed al-Sharah poses a far bigger threat because currently he's powerless. But in 10 years, in 20 years, if Syria becomes, I mean, under Ahmed al-Shara's leadership or under a new government that's not dictatorial and that's not looking to just oppress the people, we can see, or Israel is scared that Syria will grow so much in 10 years that it actually provides a very real threat right at its borders, right? Jordan is in the pockets of Israel, so Jordan's not going to do anything. Egypt is in the pockets of Israel. Lebanon is irrelevant, right? I mean, it's been properly destabilized. The Shia presence or the Hezbollah presence in, let's say, Lebanon, the Shia militia presence, sorry, I meant to say, has been just basically been destroyed. And so Lebanon strikes no threat. And to be honest, it didn't really pose that big of a threat anyway. I mean, Hezbollah was a little bit of an annoyance in the corner, but we're looking at if Syria gets into power in the next 10, 20 years, they could be the most legitimate threat to Israel that's probably it's faced since its existence.
So it's
And so that's why
it's
go for it, sorry,
preventing. So what you're saying is that, yeah, in order to prevent a threat from coming out, they want to squish that now before it becomes something that's going to pose a genuine threat to them in the future.
Exactly.
So yeah, they
Exactly.
don't
That's
want
exactly what it is.
anything, any kind of, for them to get any movement underneath them to be able to, genuinely challenge Israel. So let's talk about Jolani a little bit, inshallah. And I mean, I'm interested in understanding, coming into power from the situation that he was in the region that he's in. What are his options really? What does he have in terms of, what do I do now? Where do I go from here? It's not
Exactly.
a uncomplicated situation.
Yeah. And that's the situation that Ahmed al-Shara has, let's say, inherited or he's taken over, right? A situation of extreme instability in Syria, right? Even not necessarily from a sectarian perspective. I mean, now we can look at this presence of the Assadists as being largely diminished, and most of them had to run away, especially from Damascus. Uh, but if we look at the militias around the region, generally weaker. Syria is generally unified if it's not for attacks in all directions from, let's say, less unified militias. So it's actually wrong to say that it's properly unified. So we're looking at problems from it when it comes to a political military front, right? That Ahmed al-Sharaa has to, what's it called, bring unity to that region with plenty of militias that don't want to secede to him. A big one of them is the Kurdish presence in the north, but we also have, and what's being seen now, is a Druze presence in the south. And we'll go into that afterwards. But let's just look at Ahmed al-Sharaa currently. He's he's basically adopted a situation as a leader of a very, very poor, very, very unstable country that has been ravished by about a decade and a half of a brutal, brutal civil war, which we're looking, I mean, in terms of the civil war itself, we're looking at a genocide and a massacre that, let's say, I mean, if estimations are correct, is one of the biggest since World War II, easily. 500,000 Syrians died in, I mean, let me preface that. When they stopped counting the amount of Syrian deaths because of the civil war, 500,000 people had died. And they stopped counting very early on. So we're looking at millions of people, most likely, that have been killed by this conflict. Every family has martyrs in it. Every family has been, let's say, torn to shreds. People, the citizens had been scattered around the globe, fleeing this conflict. Many of them going to Turkey. And so Ahmed al-Sharaa has taken the situation where very, very poor country of people that have been through 15 years or close to 15 years of uh, a brutal, brutal regime and a brutal, brutal civil war. And now he has Israel attacking them. And then if we look at it on an economical front as well, Syria has about an hour of electricity a day. They don't always have running water. People are still starving. And the Assad regime was propped up by a drug trade, right? And that was also, I mean, if we look at the Israeli, if we look at why that's a profit Israel, it largely destabilized the region. I mean, so many drugs were being exported out of Syria in that region. It was one of the biggest drug exporters in the world, right? The economy was dependent on that. And that economy, all or 90% of it, let's say, went into Assad's pocket, right? So much of that was for Assad, right? Uh, and now Ahmed al-Sharaa has vowed to destroy this drug trade. What economy does he have, right? So militarily, we can actually look at it. It's slightly different, right? Militarily is different. It's slightly different. Obviously, let's look at everything else first before we look at Syria militarily. It's a very poor country, an economy that's been destroyed, an hour of electricity a day, people that have been ravished by 15 years or near a decade and a half of a brutal dictatorship and a brutal war. Obviously, 60 years of a brutal dictatorship before then. They've just about gotten into power, or the people have just about gotten let's say, a leader that seems to support their values and what they want for the region and what they want for their country. And he's only been in power 7 months, and now since he's been in power, he's been being attacked by Israel. And so, and if we look at it militarily as well, a lot of the Syrian forces at the time of Assad, or the Assadist forces, let's say, had to leave a lot of the military equipment behind them when they fled. So let's say Syria does have access to that, but still, it was not. We're looking at people that have been ravished by war. The thought of getting into another war right now would probably really, really diminish any Syrian enthusiasm for this government. And to be honest, they're not ready for it, most likely.
Mm-hmm.
And so Ahmed al-Sharaa has adopted this situation. And what can he do, right? His country is very poor. People are still starving to death. They're not ready to get into a war, even if they have, and they don't actually have that much weapons. I mean, the Assad regime could not have fought against Israel. They would have been probably destroyed if not for the intervention of Iranian presence and the intervention of Iranian arms. And that's actually one of the biggest reasons why they fell anyway, is because when Iran was being attacked by Israel, and the animosity between Iran and Israel led to what's it called? And there's obviously knock-on effects from Russia as well, because Russia was supporting the Iranian regime as was supporting Assad as well. Is that when the Assad regime stopped being funded, suddenly now, the rebels were able to come in and take over the whole country, right? And so, or the revolutionaries, let's say. And so, if we look at that, that suggests that the actual Syrian military is quite weak, right? It's a military that's propped up by foreign powers. And so when those foreign powers obviously stopped getting involved, the revolution was able to be successful. But now we are saying, okay, they haven't inherited and they haven't taken over a military that has any might, let's say, or is able to fight Israel in any sort of legitimate, in any sort of real sense. Obviously, this isn't to say that they shouldn't have tawakkul on Allah, right? But there has to be some wisdom in the way that they operate. And Ahmed al-Shara, that's so a lot of people say, why is he, you know, why is he shaking hands with Trump and why is he shaking hands? And we were talking about Ahmed al-Shara here. Why is he shaking hands with Trump and what is his stance towards MBS and the and the Gulf leaders and why is he sort of playing this game and why has he not taken a more openly aggressive stance towards Israel? And a big reason for that is that the country is just way too weak to even entertain that idea, right? And that's actually, Israel knows that. And Israel has been attacking Syria since Ahmed al-Shara got into power to kind of bait Syria into attacking them. And as soon as Syria attacks them, and this is what we've been seeing on the Western media since, October 7th and even before then, every time Israel does something to another region, it's mentioned slightly in the news, right? Immediately, any sort of response is suddenly seen as the biggest provocation. Is seen as, oh, this person wants to get into war. We saw that when Israel bombed the Iranian embassy in Damascus. When Iran attacked back, Iran was seen as the aggressor, right? And October 7th itself was seen as an act of aggression, when in reality it was a response and a fighting back to it's we're coming on to a century, about 70 years of a brutal genocidal regime against the Palestinians, constantly dehousing them. And so we've seen that in the rhetoric. And that's what Israel wants to now do to Syria. They want to attack them, baiting Syria into attacking back, right? And so that they can now go to Daddy America and Daddy Trump and be like, hey, please attack our enemy. And then, they want America to go into Syria and to destroy it. And obviously, like we said, I mean, it's because they're scared of the Syrian presence. It's because they're scared that in 10 years they'll act as a real threat to them. And then, sorry, to go back to Trump or let's say Jolani's or Ahmed al-Shara's relationship with Trump and his relationship with the Gulf states, he's looking at them as currently his Sunni brothers, right? It's a very, very diplomatic move. It's a very politically savvy move. He doesn't necessarily agree with them when it comes to their stances in the region. And that's and it's, there's a lot to suggest that, especially his past, especially the fact that he just came out of HTS and his stances in HTS were pretty clear and heavily aligned with, let's say, the Palestinians. And so there's obviously that discontent with what the leaders are doing in the region, but his country is very poor, very impoverished, and so he needs some sort of foreign aid. He went to Saudi to try and secure that. He's been to the Gulf states to try and secure that. His meeting with Trump, and Trump took a liking to him, said that he's a charismatic guy, or whatever he said. That it was seen as a very, let's say, a glad tidings to the region. Not that they like Trump, but they know that what he represents. They know that, okay, fine, if Trump is fine with us now, it lifts all, a trade embargo from us so that now we can openly trade in the region and openly trade with America. That's going to highly increase our economy. And that's actually going to allow us to get back on our feet, right? As a people, not even as a military state, as a people, it's going to allow them to reach let's say, to be more stable, as in to reach a level of stability that they were looking for in the past.
I think when it comes to the development of these situations, with each day and each introduction of new evidence, I suppose, new information that allows us to clarify, inshallah, the perspective that we have on things going on. This will be something, this particular issue of the new government and where it's going with its relationships to the Gulf states, to Saudi, to America. This is something that we'll have to discuss further in coming weeks, inshallah. But I know you wanted to discuss and to mention, so let's bring it down here in the last a few minutes of the video, inshallah, to talk about this situation with the Druze. How does that play into what you've described so far in terms of the region? What does that add into this mix that you've described?
Okay, perfect. So we've spoken about the background. Let's actually get to the crux of the situation. We have the Druze, right? The Druze are even more so than the Shia, they're seen as a very, very fringe, let's say, not conforming to the orthodox opinion sect of quote unquote Islam, right? The Druze in Syria are divided into three main groups. One following Sheikh al-Hinawi, right, who supports the new government, and another follows another guy called Layth al-Ballus or something, Belalus. I forget the exact name, and he's also in support of the new government. And so two out of three of the Druze groups are in support of the new government, right? Then we have this one last group. And this last group, the third group, is led by Hikmat al-Hijri, right? And this is a faction, like we said, oh, no, not like we said, but this is, it seems just to dismantle the idea that Israel is in support of the Druze because they care at all about any sort of human life in that region, right? They're only in support of the one that's against the Assad regime, right? And so they're in support of this group led by Hekmat al-Hijri, which is a faction composed of remnants of the Assad regime. It's composed of outlaws and sectarian Druze extremists who are militarily and politically financed and backed by Israel and Iran, right? So because obviously we spoke about the Assad regime, but also this is the group that is backed by Israel, right? So they don't back all Druze. They don't care about the Druze as a group and as a people. They care about destabilizing the region because this is the only Druze. This is the only Druze sect that is openly against the Syrian government. Uh, and they, for some time, they've openly calling for Israeli protection in Syria, right, and have publicly declared their opposition to the new Syrian government, right. So this is one of the most, let's say, scary things for a leader to face is that he has a proper militia, right, at their southern border who is allied with a foreign power that's openly against them, that's been attacking them. And this third group has been the dominant force in Sudan, completely blocking off any Syrian governmental institutions from operating in Sudan, and even basic services like electricity and water repairs were denied. Right, so it's not only that the Syrian military isn't allowed there, the Syrian governmental presence is not allowed there, right? Because of the militia's presence, right? So the militia isn't allowing the Syrian government to be present, right? And then if we look at it, so obviously we said no electricity, no repairs to basic, water repairs, and so the infrastructure is collapsing, right? Public services is collapsing, theft has become rampant, and then now there's been fighting, right? Largely from Druze attacking, largely from the Druze that are attacking Bedouin Syrians in that region, Sunni Bedouin Syrians in that region, which would, let's say, ideologically probably be far, far closer to Ahmed al-Shara than they would be to the Druze, right? Or definitely be far closer to Ahmed al-Shara, right? And so they've been attacking these Bedouins in the region. The Bedouins have been attacking back. So there has been a bit of back and forth of conflict, right? And it's very obvious that, I mean, these are just random Bedouins just living in the desert, right? Or living in southern Syria, being attacked by a militia funded by Israel. I mean, it's very obvious who's at fault here. And then, so they're even kidnapping members of those Bedouin Arab tribes. And then what happens? So as a result, insecurity and chaos in the region. The Syrian government comes to try and stop that conflict, right? So Al-Hijri, so let's actually, sorry, the Syrian government was warned, Israel was issuing warnings to the Syrian government to not intervene. Obviously, I mean, they don't want their proxy in Syria to be attacked, right? And so to not even intervene in the defense of the Arab Bedouins, right? The Syrian government claiming that the Druze are under Israeli protection. The government was unable to take action for months, right? And as a result, insecurity and chaos spread. Like I said, this intensified until the Syrian government eventually was forced to intervene and stop the violence. And then when they attempted to stop the violence, Al-Hijri's forces, and this is the Druze sect that is openly against the Syrian government. This is the one, the Druze sect. It's Al-Hijri's sect, let's say, right? His forces ambushed a military convoy, killing everyone in it, right? So we have now the militia has killed a whole military convoy sent by the government in order to ensure actually peace in the region, to stop the conflict between the Druze and the what's it called, and the Syrians of the region, or the Bedouin Arabs, right? Obviously, it's a clear act of violence, and this doesn't even have to be explained, really, right? They mutilated the bodies and they circulated videos with sectarian and religious insults. And what I wanted to add to this is that Ahmed al-Shara has taken an open stance to saying we don't want any sectarian division in Syria, right? Not even a Sunni Shia split, not even a Sunni Alawi split. He doesn't mind at all what religious group these people are from. What he wants is a politically stable region, right? And these people have been openly against him and openly attacking his forces. They mutilated bodies, like we said, and they were inciting sectarian and religious differences and insults to the Sunni majority population. Now, obviously, there's nationwide outrage, right? They've been killing their Arab Bedouin brothers, or these Al-Hijri forces, this Druze militia has been killing the Bedouin Arab forces, the Bedouin Arabs, and so obviously the people are outraged. And now, after they killed members of their or they've killed members of the Syrian military and mutilated their bodies, there's even more outrage from the Syrian people. The other, just to emphasize, the other Druze sects fully accepted to work within the new government, right? And they recognize the importance of ending the conflict, right? And ending the conflict in the region, ending the ongoing chaos that in Syria, trying to unify. In contrast, Al-Hijri himself and his forces have wanted to, have insisted that he should govern the region himself with forces without the need for government involvement. Also, I mean, how is he going to govern the region? Israeli intervention, right? And how is he going to fight against the Syrian regime? Israeli money, Israeli intervention. And so that's happened. Syria then tries to send another force in to stop it, from my understanding. And then Israel starts bombing the Syrian forces, right? And Israel just seems to be starting war after war in the region. Like we said, to destabilize the region. If we think about it, I mean, you might say, okay, fine, Israel was openly against Iran and they actually had far more conflict with Iran. Bearing in mind, Assad's regime was a proxy of Iran. Why would they want the Assad regime to stay in power? We're just looking at the history of it. They have been far more, they have attacked Syria far more frequently under the Ahmed al-Shara regime, under the new Syrian government, than they did when Assad was in power. That's the first thing. And secondly, it's sectarian differences. They know that that region is made unstable by the differences and by the disunity in that region. Imagine the whole, and we're not even talking about the Muslim world here. Obviously, that's a creedal point that as Muslims we believe in, and as Muslims we know that all Muslims should be united. But even if we looked at the Arabs in that region, if they're unified, right, under one banner and under one government and under one understanding, Israel would be significantly weakened, right? And they would need, it would be a far larger emphasis on Israel, there would need to be far more money sent in by America to even try and prop up Israel.
Jazakallah khair for that.
Yeah.
I think we'll bring it down to a close today. But I just want to sort of make this appeal to anyone who watches this video, that we are, inshallah, trying something new here at Critical Content News. We've seen some of the feedback. We want to really try to make something that's going to be analytical, that is going to help people to do this thinking for themselves, to be engaged with what's going on across the world in countries that are Muslim majority, inshallah, so that we are aware of what is going on, that we're not blindly moving through these situations and not really sure of what's happening and why and how to understand it properly. So we really value at this time your feedback and involvement in us shaping this into a service, inshallah, into something that really benefits the community, And so any constructive criticism will be warmly welcomed, and we look forward to hearing that, inshallah. We will be making these conversations regularly, and perhaps we'll give a bit more time. I think there was much more that we could go into on this particular issue, but of course on other issues that are taking place around the world as well, inshallah. So we'll put a pin in the conversation. We won't say this is a conclusion of the conversation, but something that we're going to come back to and to continue to explore, inshallah. So Jazakallah khair, Nathir, for your insights. And for those watching, we will see you soon, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
All right.